Let's start with schedule updates. Tomorrow, President Trump will travel to Ohio and Kentucky, where he will highlight economic achievements. And he will detail the administration's efforts to continue lowering prices and the cost of living for American workers. The president will visit Thermo Fisher Scientific in Ohio and deliver a speech at Verst Logistics in Kentucky. On Thursday, President Trump and the First Lady will host a Women's History Month event in the East Room. And on Friday, the president will sign several executive orders, and we will provide more details about them later this week. As President Trump shared with the American people last night, the United States Armed Forces are making tremendous progress in achieving our military objectives in Operation Epic Fury, 10 days after it began. This campaign has been a resounding success so far, and American warriors are winning this important fight at an even faster pace than we anticipated. More than 5,000 enemy targets have already been hit so far. Iran's ballistic missile attacks have dropped by more than 90%, and drone attacks have decreased by approximately 85% since the start of Operation Epic Fury. The United States is also annihilating the Iranian regime's navy, and we have already destroyed more than 50 Iranian naval vessels, including a major drone carrier ship. None of the regime's vessels are operating in the main waterways of the region, and the Iranian Navy has been deemed ineffective in combat. The trend is clear. The combat capabilities of Escalate are becoming more lethal and dominant every day. While the response of the Iranian terrorist regime has diminished now, the armed forces of Escalate are moving forward to dismantle Iran's missile production. B-2 bombers recently dropped dozens of 900 kg penetrating bombs on deeply buried missile sites. Last night, President Trump reiterated his commitment to keeping the flow of oil through the Strait of Hormuz so that the United States and its allies receive their energy needs. President Trump will not allow rogue Iranian terrorists to impede freedom of navigation and the free flow of energy. Let me be clear. It is a good thing to eliminate terrorists who attack civilians indiscriminately and try to hold the global economy hostage. And President Trump should be praised for doing this. As the president made absolutely clear to the remaining elements of this terrorist regime in his statement yesterday, if they do anything to disrupt the flow of oil or goods in the Strait of Hormuz, they will be hit by the most powerful armed forces in the world, 20 times stronger than they have been so far. Moving forward, the stated objectives of Operation Epic Fury remain the same. Destroy the hostages' ballistic missiles, destroy the Iranian missile industry, prevent their allies from destabilizing the region, and ensure that Iran never has nuclear weapons. President Trump remains confident that these objectives will be achieved quickly. As for the oil market, he already expected that the regime would try to disrupt global markets. That's why his energy team had been preparing well before the attack and acted to deal with these disruptions. The Trump administration has offered political risk insurance for oil tankers operating in the Gulf. The Treasury temporarily suspended certain oil sanctions, and the commander-in-chief made the Zaberniwa Navy available to escort the ships. The president and his energy team are monitoring the markets, talking with industry leaders, and the armed forces of Zexinium Minar are preparing new options after a presidential directive to keep the Strait of Hormuz open. I will not reveal such options, but know that the president will not hesitate to use them, so rest assured. The recent increase in oil and gas prices is temporary, and this operation will result in cheaper gasoline in the long run. As soon as the security objectives of Operation Epic Fury are achieved, Americans will see prices drop quickly, maybe even lower than before the operation. We will live in a world where Iran can no longer threaten the United States or our allies with a nuclear bomb. On another topic, here in the country, President Trump is encouraging Congress to pass the Save America Act, one of the most important laws in our nation. The Save America Act is popular among all Americans because its provisions are based on common sense. The act has 5 simple requirements, as requested by the #1 President of the United States. Voters must present identification to vote in an American election. Very simple. 90% of Americans, including more than 80% of Democrats, agree with this. #2, The Save America Act will require voters to provide proof of citizenship to register and vote in American elections. Again, this is popular and just common sense. Only American citizens have the right to vote in American elections. But now that Joe Biden and the Democrats have allowed millions of illegals to enter, it's more important than ever to ensure that only American citizens register. To vote on our nation's voter rolls, Congress needs to pass the Save America Act, which abolishes the incredibly unsafe practice of universal mail-in voting, which makes fraud easier. It's important to note that the act keeps exceptions so that Americans can use mail-in voting in cases of illness, disability, military reasons, or travel. The 2005 bipartisan report from the Federal Election Reform Commission, chaired among others by former President Jimmy Carter and former Secretary of State James Baker, concluded that absentee ballots remain the largest potential source of electoral fraud, and it's time for Congress to finally address this. Number 4, the Save America Act permanently prohibits men from competing in women's sports. President Trump signed a historic executive order that reaffirms the promise of Title IX and puts an end to this dangerous and unfair practice. But now it's time for Congress to turn this into law. Number 5, the Save America Act prohibits transgender mutilation surgeries on children. Once again, President Trump signed a common-sense executive order to do this and kept his promise to the American people. But now Congress needs to do the same and turn this into law. It's long past time for Democrats in Congress to stop perpetuating the radical and false claim that it's possible to change a child's sex. You can't. Passing the Save America ACT is essential for Republicans and Democrats to ensure the integrity of elections and protect our democracy. The American people elected Republicans for this, and they must fulfill that promise soon. The President is asking Congress to immediately send this historic legislation for his signature. With that, today I'll answer your questions. Benny, thank you for coming. Why don't you start?
Thank you, Carolina. My first question is actually about the Save America ACT. So one of the biggest things that the Democrats are saying, the claims they're making, is that the Save America ACT would prevent married women from voting in elections or make it harder for them to vote. What do you have to say about these claims? Is that valid, and where do you think they got this idea?
There is no validity to these claims, and I'm glad you brought this up because the Democrats created this myth that unfortunately has been perpetuated by many in the mainstream media. Let me be very clear. The Save America Act does not prohibit anyone from voting, except for illegal aliens. And the biggest way to deprive American citizens of their right to vote in American elections is to allow illegal aliens to vote, which is exactly what the Democrats want to do. This happens in Democrat jurisdictions at the state and local levels across the country. The Save America Act addresses this. As for married women who have changed their names and are already registered, they are not affected by the Save Act. And for the small fraction of people who have changed their name or address, they can still register to vote. Of course, they just need to follow the state's procedures to update their documentation. This is something that the American people, women, and minorities all across the country are able to do, despite what the Democrats insultingly say. They already do this every day going to Social Security or the DMV. And I honestly find it insulting that Democrats say certain groups in this country can't update their documents in order to vote. I repeat, that's a big myth, and I appreciate the opportunity to clarify it.
Of course. And just one more question about DHEC, about the funding issue. It's been more than 3 weeks, right? I was at the airport in St. Louis, Missouri this morning. It was really early, and I saw one of the TSA agents. She was kind of crying. She was crying. And I asked, what's going on? And she said, I can't pay my cell phone bill. I can barely pay the car payment that's coming up. I want what you do. I think in Washington, D.C., there's a lot of discord between Democrats and Republicans. It's the fault of both Democrats and Republicans. But what is the White House's message to the American people who are struggling because they're not getting their paychecks? Let's put politics aside. What do you have to say to those people?
President Trump wants the Department of Homeland Security, the TSA, FEMA, and the brave men and women of the Coast Guard to receive their paychecks, and he wants this department fully funded and reopened. And to any American without a paycheck, we know there are more than 100,000 of you across the country. For any American who is going to an airport and facing incredibly long wait times and lines, Call your Democratic representative in Congress and ask them to fund the Department of Homeland Security. That's what President Trump wants to do. And it's completely ridiculous that the American people are suffering as a result of these partisan games being played by the Democrats on Capitol Hill.
Thank you very much, Laura.
Thank you. You said the operation was going faster than expected. How long do you think the war will last?
Steve, the initial plan of the president and ZUA was 4 to 6 weeks. For the objectives of Operation Epic Fury, to destroy their missiles and their ability to manufacture them, and to eliminate their navy. To permanently deny them nuclear weapons forever, and to weaken their evil terrorist proxies in the region, the armed forces of Zamantiyarwa and our brave fighters are, quickly and efficiently, achieving these objectives ahead of schedule. But ultimately, the operations will end when the commander determines that the military objectives have been achieved, and that Iran is in complete and unconditional surrender, whether they want it or not.
And the president still wants Iran's unconditional surrender.
Well, when President Trump says that Iran is in a position of unconditional surrender, he's not claiming that the Iranian regime will come out and declare that publicly. What the president means is that Iran's threats will no longer be backed by a ballistic missile arsenal that protects them while they build a nuclear bomb in their country. There's no point in making empty threats without actions to back them up. President Trump will determine when Iran is in unconditional surrender, that is, when it is no longer a direct threat to the United States and our allies. Adriana, thank you.
Could you explain why? The United States Secretary of Energy published and then seems to have deleted a post on Platform X saying that the U.S. Navy escorted an oil tanker through the Strait of Hormuz.
Yes, I was informed about that post. I haven't spoken directly with the Secretary of Energy about it. However, I know that the post was taken down very quickly, and I can confirm that the U.S. Navy has not escorted any oil tanker at this time. Although this is an option that the President has already said he will absolutely use if and when necessary at the appropriate time.
And if it was something posted by mistake, it could have been because of an employee or something like that, so I think there will be some consequence. That's why. I know you'll check, but in general, yes.
I'll leave the answer again to the Department of Energy.
And what if I gave you a quick response? Well, regarding oil and sanctions, the president said there would be some sanctions. What would be lifted would be those sites in Venezuela, in Russia. Could you give more details and also the timeline?
Of course. I know that the Treasury Department and the President's energy team are still discussing this and will consult the President before making any decisions. I don't have any announcements about new sanctions or about lifting sanctions for you today. Alex?
Thank you. Reuters reported that about 150 American military personnel have been injured so far. Can you confirm that number and provide more details about it?
I can't confirm that exact number. I know it's around that number, but I recommend reaching out to the Pentagon to get the exact number of wounded or injured so far.
And then secondly, if I may, I wanted to ask about, just a second. There was a briefing at the Capitol today, and some senators came out saying they were more convinced than ever that there would be American troops on the ground. Senator Blumenthal said that. That's not true. What's your reaction to that, and any update on what President Trump thinks about it?
Look, I would say that the Democrats on Capitol Hill are clearly being quite disingenuous. 3 years ago, not a single Democrat voted against the resolution condemning Iran as the main sponsor of terrorism. However, now with President Trump finally taking the action that so many Democrats have asked him to take for years, to eliminate the threat of an out-of-control Iranian regime, suddenly the Democrats are playing politics with this long-standing American bipartisan policy. And 53 of them in the House recently voted against the resolution that condemns Iran as a state sponsor of terrorism in the world. So I wouldn't take the Democrats at their word. As for troops on the ground, the president has already spoken about this repeatedly. Wisely, he doesn't rule out options as commander-in-chief. I would hesitate to confirm anything that a Democrat on Capitol Hill says right now about the president's thinking.
John, you described to Steve the military components of what would be needed to end this war, but it seems there's also a political component. The president told Fox earlier today that he doesn't believe the new Ayatollah can live in peace. He made a series of comments suggesting that he should be involved in choosing the new Iranian leader. The end of this war also depends on Iran choosing a leader that the president considers acceptable. And if that's the case, how would that not be the definition of a war for regime change?
President Trump stated clearly and directly, "It is obviously in the best interest of the United States and the West not to have another radical terrorist in charge of Iran." Especially when we see their reaction to Operation Epic Fury, they pointed their missiles at our Gulf and Arab partners in the region. Again, this was a regime that shouted or still shouts, "Death to America." We see the way they are holding the entire world hostage by restricting the free flow of energy through the Strait of Hormuz. So the president, I think, is making a pretty obvious comment again regarding the timeline of military operations. Regarding Iran, we have objectives that we have set and that the commander-in-chief wants to see achieved. When these objectives are met, it will be up to the president to end this operation.
Right, but you're not exactly answering my question. That political objective is also necessary for the president to decide to end this war.
Look, once again, I just told you the objectives of Operation Epic Fury. When those objectives are achieved, the president will determine the end of these operations. When he considers that Iran no longer poses a credible threat to the United States of America. And again, we return to the question of what that unconditional surrender would look like. Iran can say whatever it wants, but its words will be empty when we have completely annihilated its navy, eliminated the threat of their ballistic missiles, and ensured that they can no longer manufacture a nuclear bomb to threaten the United States, our allies, and troops in the region. That is what President Trump is ultimately seeking with this operation.
Jennifer.
I heard about a shooting in front of a synagogue in Baltimore. Has the president been informed, and are there more details about the incident?
I don't know, but we'll provide more details, Jennifer. I don't know if the president has already commented, but I'll check when I return to the Oval Office after this.
Thank you, Caroline. Well, the president said yesterday for the first time that he needed to strike Iran because he believed Iran would attack American targets within 7 days, and then he reduced that time frame to 3 days. Where did he get that information from?
Well, this isn't the first time the president has stated that he chose to launch Operation Epic Fury because he believed Iran would strike the United States and our assets in the region first. I already covered this at the last briefing. The president based his impression on facts provided by his top negotiators who were acting in a good faith effort with the Iranian regime. The Iranian regime was lying and deceiving the United States of America, clearly trying to maintain its nuclear program to create a bomb that would obviously threaten the United States of America. Their ballistic missile arsenal was increasing rapidly every month, to the point where they were essentially creating immunity, where a future president or President Trump would not be able to launch this incredibly successful operation. And then the president, again, as I have reiterated and as he himself said, was not going to stand by and allow the Iranian regime to threaten or attack the United States of America any longer.
But leaders of the IRF or Israel are not making these claims. Is he making this up to justify the war now?
The president is not making anything up. Nancy, he is analyzing this every day based on intelligence, facts, and the information that he and his negotiators have received. Again, based on the negotiations with the rogue Iranian regime over the past year. And the president and his team have tried in good faith to reach a diplomatic agreement through peaceful means with the Iranian regime. And Iran chose this path toward death and destruction. Iran wanted to attack the United States of America, and the president was not going to stand by and do nothing while that was happening. He refused to let that happen, and everyone should be grateful. This is John.
Thank you, Caroline. I have two questions, one about following up on the statement and one regarding the start of the Save America Act presentation. Yesterday, Senate Majority Leader John Toney talked about the attempt to potentially break a filibuster, that is, to violate the filibuster rules. He said, there aren't enough votes first to silence the filibuster, and there aren't enough votes for a talking filibuster, he said. That's the reality. What is your reaction to what Senator Toney said?
Look, President Trump's urgency to pass the Save America Act and also his desire for this legislation which could save the country have already become quite clear. He wants all options on the table and wants the Senate to move forward as quickly as possible by any means necessary.
And secondly, just about the trip for the president tomorrow. Looking ahead, why Ray and why North Kennedy?
Why not two big states with good Americans?
Why did they choose them?
Big states with great Americans? The president will be accompanied by legislators from both states, one whom he admires, respects, and supports very much. And he will meet with business people in those two places to discuss the economy, which is obviously extremely important to him. Hello, John?
In the back.
Thank you, come. Last week, the Secretary of Energy granted a waiver to India to obtain oil.
Russian oil in this energy crisis, since you've discussed it with the president, what's the reasoning?
I've already talked to the president about this. Yes, I've already talked to the president about this. Well, the president, the Secretary of the Treasury, and the entire national security team came to this decision. Our allies in India, as you know, Lalit, have been behaving well and had already stopped buying sanctioned Russian oil. While we work to ease this temporary gap in oil supply around the world due to the Iranians, we have temporarily allowed them to accept Russian oil. And that Russian oil was already at sea. It was already on the water. So this short-term measure, we don't believe it will bring significant financial benefits to the Russian government at this time.
I have one more question about Pakistan. You know that Pakistan is a neighbor of Iran and the president, and Pakistan is also an ally of the Treasury. The president has praised Field Marshal a lot. Is Pakistan offering any kind of support in this war against Iran?
I'll check that with the Pentagon and get back to you. Of course.
Thank you, Caroline. The president said yesterday that President Putin offered to help in the Middle East. In a statement from the Kremlin, Putin said, "I reaffirm our unwavering support for Tehran and our solidarity with our Iranian friends." How does the president see Russia's usefulness, even without supporting Iran? And did he press Putin to share intelligence information with Iran in this war?
The president and his special envoy Vitkov stated that they sent a message to Russia, that if this were happening, they would not be satisfied and they hope that it is not. As for more details about the discussions between these two leaders, it is up to the president to disclose any other part of that conversation. But he confirmed that yesterday and shared a bit of the context, his point of view, and his perspective, as Lucas always does well.
Regarding the missile attack on the Iranian school, how long does the government expect the investigation to last? Does the White House or Department of
Defense plan to release a full report with their findings as soon as the investigation is completed?
The Department of War will do so. The investigation is ongoing, and as the president said yesterday in his press conference, he will accept the conclusion of this investigation, whatever it may be.
Caroline, please.
Let's head to the last row for some affection. Of course, in the back with the glasses. Go ahead, Caroline.
As for the Americans' shield.
CA, Caroline can go, but go first.
Thank you, CA. Any updates on...
With that rough terrain behind, I want to help you.
Is there any news about Cuba? And by the way, an economic agreement is imminent?
I don't have any news about Cuba for you. Today, the government is actively handling this matter. The president was clear that he believes, based on facts, that the Cuban regime is doomed to fall. The country is obviously in a very weak situation, economically speaking. People are calling for help, and the president knows the Cuban regime wants an agreement. So as you know, Secretary of State Rubio took part in these conversations, as directed by the president. I don't have any updates for you today.
Thank you, Caroline. Regarding the Shield of the Americas, President Trump's initiative this weekend, there are some big names, many countries, but some notable absences. For example, Colombia, which is a key U.S. ally in the fight against drug trafficking. And President Gustavo Petro was here at the White House and met with President Trump. Why wasn't Colombia invited to the Shield of the Americas?
I think we're still not seeing the level of cooperation we'd like from the Colombian government to invite them to the Shield of the Americas event at the Pact. But we certainly hope that this new organization will grow and that we can continue to invite other member countries. But there were several countries there. I believe there were 17 countries represented, 12 heads of state with the president over the weekend. They signed a defense agreement with all our armed forces to emphasize the need to fight drug cartels throughout Latin America and the Western Hemisphere. And finally, of course, to contain illegal drug trafficking for the United States, which is the president's top priority in all of this. Saturday's event was excellent, and we hope the coalition will expand. Caroline Kelly back there, Caroline.
Thank you. It's good to see you're well. I would like to go back to a question that was asked earlier. The political aspects were mentioned, but there are also ideological and spiritual aspects to what Iran has been saying for 47 years. Death to America, death to Israel. And we just talked about the fact that terror has existed around the world. Iran has been at the center of this in so many ways. The president made it clear to the American people why this is important. It's such an imminent threat so that the Democrats on Capitol Hill, the Republicans, and the American people understand how imminent the threat was.
I think so. Kelly, you've heard the president speak almost daily over the past 10 days. You've heard me say this right here. You've heard it from the Secretary of Defense, the Secretary of State, and the Vice President. The President's cabinet and his advisors have been explaining to the public the threat that Iran poses to the country at this moment and over the past 47 years, and their words repeating the chant, "Death to America," speak for themselves.
So,
Caroline, go ahead, you can proceed.
why is there this division among the American people? I notice that people are talking about the War Powers Act, they're talking about all kinds of issues. But people have forgotten how imminent that threat was. If they keep saying death to America, death to Israel, it's serious.
Look, I don't think the American people have forgotten, but the Democrats on Capitol Hill, they haven't forgotten. But they're so consumed by resisting everything President Trump does that, they can't even come together again. By the principle of common sense, bipartisan and long-standing in the United States of America, that Iran is a threat and the main state sponsor of terrorism in the world, which is reflected in their voting pattern. In 2023, all members of the House of Representatives, except for one, I believe the final vote was 412 to 1, in 2023 for a resolution condemning Iran as the world's leading state sponsor of terrorism. And now this year, under this president, in 2026, 53 Democrats voted against exactly that same resolution with exactly the same wording. I don't think that's a change in the threat that Iran poses to the United States. I think it's a change in the thinking of the Democratic Party and in the deep and fierce hatred they have for President Trump.
Iran, big, level. Following Kelly's question, what is the current level of national threat today due to the death threats against the United States and Israel?
I believe that the Department of Homeland Security and the FBI have been constantly providing updates on the threat level to the homeland. I don't want to speak out of turn, but the federal government continues to work with local law enforcement across the country to prevent possible threats to the nation. This is an issue that the administration obviously takes extremely seriously. We are thwarting threats that most Americans are unaware of because they don't make headlines. But that's the excellent work that the Department of Homeland Security does. This reinforces why the Democrats need to fund and fully reopen the DHS. Now, Danny.
Thank you about the Iranian school. What did President Trump say yesterday?
That Iran would have Tomahawk missiles when only 3 allies besides the IWA themselves have those missiles and could be held responsible.
Look, again, as the president said yesterday, he will accept the conclusion of this investigation by the Department of War. There's been media speculation about who's responsible, but let's wait for the Department of War to finish its investigation before jumping to conclusions. The president has the right to share his opinions with the American public, but he said he will accept the conclusion of this investigation. And frankly, we will not be pressured by the New York Times, which has published many articles with claims that have not been verified by the Department of War, to quickly close this investigation just because of pressure from the New York Times. Thank you. Hi, thank you very much, Caroline from DHS. Currently, under this partial shutdown by the Democrats, the administration has specific concerns about the impact on Homeland Security or on the monitoring of intelligence regarding sleeper cells. And any comment about the 2 individuals who tried to bomb New York City? Yes, it was absolutely despicable to see that attack in New York. The FBI is investigating, and the Department of Justice, along with the Southern District of New York, announced the indictment of those 2 individuals for terrorism. And they will not rest until justice is served in this case.
Daniel. Thank you, Caroline. I appreciate it. Millions of Americans are filing income tax for the first time under the new law. The big and beautiful bill has been signed into law. IRS data shows that the average federal refund is $3,800, a little higher than the same period last year. The president believes that the increase in the average refund could generate economic growth, something he has been focusing on a lot. As the year goes on,
certainly, and Americans will start to reap the benefits of President Trump's and the Republicans' work through the passing of the law and the major historic tax cut project. We are in tax filing season, and according to recent Treasury data, almost 63.5 million returns have already been processed, representing 45% of the total expected by April 15. So, don't forget to file your taxes. The average refund this year is over $3,700 US. And we know that more than 27.5 million people who have already filed their taxes so far have claimed at least one of President Trump's new tax cuts. More than 3.5 million returns claim tax exemption on tips, and more than 15.5 million returns claim tax exemption on overtime. More than 9.2 million returns claim the expanded deduction for seniors. And more than 690,000 returns claim tax exemption on interest from car loans. And another impressive figure, almost 3.5 million Trump accounts have been opened for children in our country so far, so we look forward to, I know the Treasury continues to look forward to seeing those checks going out to hardworking Americans. The President will meet with them in person tomorrow during a trip through Ohio and Kentucky, and we hope to see you there. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.